Good evening. This is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is my weekly internet show on Sunday evening, October 28th. Nice to be back with y'all. We concluded our week-long college civil liberties tour last weekend, and it went absolutely fantastic. I mean, it was just absolutely awesome. We began it in Seattle at the University of Washington. We had a crowd of about 200 people, mostly students, but some non-students in the audience. And Jack Hunter from Young Americans for Liberty, who also worked for the Ron Paul campaign and currently does work for Senator Rand Paul. He was the moderator. And then we had myself as a libertarian, Glenn Greenwald, who now blogs for The Guardian. He was the liberal on the panel, and then Bruce Fine, who used to work as an attorney for the Reagan Justice Department, the conservative on the panel. And the primary message, was that to these students was it doesn't matter what your ideological perspective is, that we were all on the same page. Some of them came to the program thinking, oh, well, this is going to be a debate. Well, it wasn't a debate. It was a message on which all three of us, liberal, conservative, libertarian, and the moderator, are all on the same page on the vital and critical importance of civil liberties, what the government has done to civil liberties in the name of the war on terrorism and national security, and all the other stuff that comes with it, with an imperial foreign policy and a vast military-industrial complex, troops all over the world. And so what we wanted to show them was that what are the root causes of the woes that America is suffering? And of course, the root causes are this interventionist foreign policy, the giant national security state that was brought into existence supposedly to fight communism, and the vast empire, the troops all over the world, supposedly, a force for good in the world, and so we wanted to show these students that this is the root cause, or at least one of the twin root causes of America's woes, at least in terms of foreign policy, terrorism, anger and rage against the United States, out of control federal spending, and then how the government uses the crisis that it itself produces in as the excuse to take away our civil liberties. And of course, you could tell some of these students were just wide-eyed when they learned that we now live in a country in which the government, the president, has the power to send the military out across the land and start rounding up citizens without any due process of law, and incarcerate them indefinitely, torture them, and even execute them, after some sort of kangaroo tribunal. We explained that this is the hallmark of dictatorial regimes. This is not what America was supposed to be all about. And, we talked about the Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendments and how our ancestors were so concerned that this is precisely what would end up happening if they let the federal government be called into existence by the Constitution. And a lot of the students, they seemed that they didn't realize that the Constitution called the government into existence, and with limitations. And of course, those limitations have gone out the window now in the name of the war on terrorism and stuff. And so that first evening went great. And then the next night we went to the University of California at Davis. That again went great. Nice crowd there, 140, 150 people. Then down to the University of California at San Diego. And then we lost one of our panelists there. Bruce had a stomach ache that morning, and it kept getting worse and worse and worse. And to such a point where Bart Frazier, our program director, finally took him to the hospital Wednesday afternoon. And they said, oh, well, you've got to have surgery right now, And the surgery was routine, but the matter he needed to get it operated on right then. And so, he's all fine now, but he couldn't continue on the tour. So the panel was down to two. And so we flew over to that one great there at University of San Diego, California, San Diego. Then we flew over to Tucson, minus Bruce, and had a great time there. The hotel was right next to the campus, so we could just walk to the venue. It was absolutely awesome. And Then Friday, it turns out that Glenn was having trouble making connections on his flight. He was going to Ottawa to speak at a big lawyers conference, and he couldn't do both. And so what we did was we realized he had a big layover in Chicago, so we put together a Skype presentation where he was speaking from the Admirals Club there at American Airlines at Chicago Airport to the group there in University of Colorado Boulder. And of course, we did this with the Young Americans for Liberty, this great, libertarian free market group. They were responsible for putting all the venues together, promoting it on campus, and just did a fantastic job. So it was, all in all, it was just a big success. We videotaped them. Had trouble with the audio sometimes because we were dependent on some of the facilities there, and it didn't work out. And so we've already posted one on our website. The first one, and we're going to be proceeding on this next week with the balance of them, and each one's different, and especially when you see the Q&A. The Q&A got pretty lively at times, and I think we did a good job at raising people's vision to why this area is so critically important. As I told the audiences, I said, I don't think any freedom issue is more important than this. I mean, this is why we've now done 2 of these things. We did one last winter over at Columbia and Middle Tennessee State University, Ohio State University, and Purdue, Indiana University. And, when the government's got the power to send the military out and just pick up people and cart them away to a military dungeon or a concentration camp, torture them, execute them, I mean, that's the ultimate power. You can have the right to keep and bear arms and the right of free speech and the right of freedom of religion and so forth. But if the government says, okay, you got all those rights, but, we have the authority to come and pick you up whenever we want, what good are all those rights? And that, of course, is what the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th Amendments are about. I mean, imagine that. 4 amendments dealing with the power of the government to come and seize people. So that's what we're doing with these college civil liberties tour. And then, of course, we videotape them to share them with other people. Well, here we've got the presidential race, and I know, yawn. I mean, it's an exercise in boredom for us libertarians, to watch these statists battle over, which one's the better statist, which one's going to better manage the economy, which one's going to produce the jobs, as if, the job of the president is to create jobs. I mean, this is so ludicrous, but that's the way the statists think. That the job of the government, and specifically the job of the president, is to manage the economy, a government-managed economy. It's the government's job to create jobs. That's what the president's there for. Hey, Mr. President, I don't have a job. Why haven't you created a job for me? And of course, to watch over us like little children. I find it so amusing that President Obama is taking Mitt Romney to task because of that Romney statement that was done in secret when he was talking to all those fat cats. He was saying, well, there's 47% of Americans on the dole, and I'm not going to worry about them. And Obama's in his advertisements is saying, this is horrendous. Imagine a president who's not going to worry about his people. I mean, it's like parents with children. You see, they really think it's the job of the president to worry about his adult children, taking care of them and watching over them. And of course, it doesn't work. I mean, did you see the big news story about, all these people that have received injections for pain in their backs and they got infected with meningitis? How's that possible? Isn't the government supposed to keep us safe? Isn't that the whole purpose of the regulated society? To watch over us, to manage our lives, to make sure that no harm befalls us? And I love it when they say, well, the regulations, they didn't have enough regulations, or the regulations were insufficient. I mean, they're hemming and hawing about the regulations because, again, this is the job of the regulated society, right? I mean, isn't that what they're charged with doing? Watching over, regulating, inspecting. And of course, this is what we've argued from the very first, year of our inception at the Future of Freedom Foundation. They don't do any of those things. These are bureaucrats, have a job. They draw a salary. They go out and make, an inspection or two. And They couldn't care less. And then when something happens, they say, well, there's a bunch of hand wringing. It's not our fault, not our fault. We needed more regulations, and if only we had a more highly regulated society in America. We need new laws, and well, this is ridiculous, because you know what they do? They lull people into thinking that they're being taken care of. Right? I mean, those people that were getting injections, they didn't have any questions about whether those injections were safe. Why? Because in their mind, they live in a paternalistic, regulated welfare state where the government keeps them safe. So they have no incentive to do some investigation to see, hey, is this a proper lab? There's no, reporting agency in a private sector like Consumer Reports and stuff, hey, saying, hey, you need to go here, don't go here, because everybody thinks, oh, well, they're safe. The government's job is to keep us safe, right? I mean, look at the legal profession. What do they tell us the purpose of licensure is? Issuing licenses to lawyers. Well, it's to protect us, right, from incompetent, unethical lawyers. Well, hello, duh. You look around and you see a plethora of unethical, incompetent lawyers. I mean, there's cases getting reversed because of criminal cases because of lawyer incompetence, and we read all the time of lawyers embezzling funds and engaging in other unethical practice. Well, how's this possible? I mean, isn't the license a guarantee that that these are going to be ethical, competent lawyers? No, it's a protection racket by the Bar Association. It protects lawyers from the competition of non-lawyers or people who would be lawyers. You see, by limiting the number of lawyers practicing, it's like a caste in the old 18th century and so forth. During the age of mercantilism, and they can limit the number of practitioners and therefore charge higher fees, make a lot of money. It's a little closed shop for them. If you had no licensure, people could come into the market. Legal providers, people like no-fault divorces, paralegals could do a wealth of legal services to people that would lower the cost of legal services. But every time somebody tries it, the lawyers go ballistic and say, oh, we've got to protect the public, got to protect the public. It's ridiculous because they don't protect the public. And the greatest essay on this is Milton Friedman's essay on occupational licensure. We've got it on our website at fff.org. Just Google it there. And it's awesome. And he takes the toughest case, not the shoe shine case, where they have licensure for shoe shine people or hairdressers and all this ridiculous nonsense. He takes the medical profession and says it's ridiculous to have licensure in the medical profession. But you see, my point is that this whole regulated society under which we're living, it doesn't work anyway. And look at this government managed economy. Yeah, that's a big winner, right? I mean, look at this thing. It's an absolute horrific mess. Not to mention the fact that they're spending, what, $1 trillion more than what they're bringing in? I mean, imagine that. Spending $1 trillion more than what they're bringing in. And that amount they're having to borrow, okay? And so they borrow that amount, and that's just additional debts on the back of the American taxpayer. I forget what everybody's per capita share is, but I think it's like $53,000. And everybody just, kind of whistles past the graveyard like, oh, we don't need to worry, we owe it to ourselves, that kind of nonsense that they taught us in our public schools. Well, it's not we owe it to ourselves. There's one group of people who are the bondholders, and they want to be paid. And there's the taxpayers who are going to scream like banshees over the fact that they're getting taxed $53,000 a person, a family of four, over $200,000 to pay the bondholders. Or more likely, they'll just inflate. That's what the Federal Reserve is for. They'll just debase the currency, pay everybody off in cheapened dollars. The Chinese communists are not going to like that. They've already said they don't like it. They're the ones that loaned money to the empire to fund its wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they want to be paid full value. They don't want cheap and debased dollars. But you just see this economic morass under which we're living, right? I mean, it's just horrendous. Everywhere you look, it's a mess. Out of control spending, right? The value of the dollar. I mean, look at it over decades. It's just they've plundered and looted the American people just by debasing the currency. The dollar is worth about 5% of what it was when the Fed came into existence, because decade after decade they stimulate the economy. They pay off debts with cheapened money, and they just keep printing the money and printing the money, expanding money and credit, and that's how they loot people. And then, of course, who do they blame it on when prices start rising that reflect this debased currency? Oh, it's big business. It's the service station owner. Oh, it's the grocery store operator. It's everybody but the Federal Reserve. And, fortunately, I think people are catching on to this game. But, whenever you suggest as a libertarian what to do here, the statists go ballistic. I mean, here you have this gigantic public sector. And when I say public, I'm talking about not just the welfare sector. I'm not talking just about the drug war sector, not just the regulated economy sector or the regulation sector. I'm talking about the military sector too. All the, I don't know how many tens of thousands of contractors, subcontractors. Think of all the people, all the companies that are furnishing, soft drinks and meals and clothing and tanks and bullets and tear gas and airplanes and I mean, there are a lot of people on the dole. Now, I don't know if Romney included those people. I think he was referring to Social Security recipients, Medicare recipients, food stamp recipients, education grants, and so forth. But this is, of course, what conservatives don't like to talk about is, you've got the whole military sector. I mean, you have this gigantic public government sector. And that's what we might call the parasitic sector. Why do we call it that? Because it's not producing any wealth. And this is oftentimes what statists don't realize. They think the government's like just another player in the economy. So when you say, for example, look, lay off all those workers, dismantle those bureaucracies, the statists, especially the statists in the mainstream press, they go absolutely ballistic. I mean, they're just shocked. You can see it now. Watch the debates, especially after the presidential election, when the debt ceiling starts coming up, and then they have this sequestration deal that's supposed to take place on December 31st because they couldn't strike a deal on cutting the budget, so they have automatic cuts. Well, that was the purpose of it, automatic, where okay, there's all the discretion's taken out of it, and they're not major anyway, but the mainstream press is already going ballistic, and they're the statist press. I mean, these are dyed-in-the-wool statists. They're not like people on the internet. These are people that got their education in government-approved schools. The indoctrination was complete. They truly believe that the government sector is a productive sector, just like the private sector. Well, it's not. You've got the parasitic sector that taxes the productive sector and then lives off those tax revenues. That's how the military lives. That's how all the contractors and subcontractors live. Social Security, Medicare, education grants, foreign dictators, foreign aid. All of this sector that lives off federal largesse is doing so from the largesse that's been taxed from the private productive sector. Okay, so that means if there's no private productive sector, there ain't no welfare state. There ain't no warfare state. There ain't no drug war. Because how are they going to live? I mean, you all of a sudden you have you can have such a tiny minority of the private sector trying to fund this giant, enormous public sector, which again is the parasitic sector. You see this in North Korea, for example, in Cuba, where everybody works for the state. I mean, there's no private sector. So, I mean, they're all essentially serfs. They're serfs working for the state. And, did I mention that they're all starving to death? You see, and so what would you say to the North Koreans if they said, well, they came to you and they said, okay, what's the solution to all this starvation? Well, if you're a libertarian, you would say, it's a no-brainer. Fire everybody. Stop the dole for everybody. Just put everybody out in the private sector. Okay, dismantle your big military machine here. Put them all in the private sector. The statists over here would go ballistic. They would say, no, no, no. North Korean officials. That'd be the worst thing you can do because you would increase unemployment. All those people, oh, it would be shock therapy. Oh my gosh, no, no, don't listen to those libertarians. They're too radical. They're too extreme. Oh, no, no. Just stimulate the economy. Print a little bit of extra money, and that's the solution. That'll get you wealthy again. That's ridiculous. Because if printing money was the key to wealth, North Korea would be wealthy because it doesn't take a whole lot of money to buy a printing press. All they have to do is go buy a printing press, start printing the money, and stimulate the economy, and hunky-dory, days are here. Well, that's the point, is that that's the cause of their problems, all this statism. This is what the statists over here can't understand. Now, if you then come back to the United States, the principle's no different. Okay, you've got a much smaller government sector as compared to the North Korean sector. Theirs is 100%. I don't know what it is over here, but it's enormous. But there's still a private sector that funds this government sector, the welfare state, the warfare state, the regulated economy, the managed economy, the DEA, the whole shebang. But it's getting worse. And you see what the statists are saying is, hey, just keep taxing what's left of the private sector. That's their solution. Don't lay off any of these people, they're saying. Just tax more out of the private sector to fund this gigantic parasitic sector. Well, they've been doing that for decades, though. I mean, the government sector keeps growing and growing, and fortunately, the private sector has been growing despite this. So happy days have been here for the welfare warfare state. They got plenty of taxpayers. The people on the parasitic side, man, they love it. They feeding off all this largesse, feeding at the trough, and so forth. But it very well may be, and we libertarians have been predicting this for ever so very long, that you reach a point where your private sector can't handle the burden anymore. And of course, a lot of wealthy people are saying, "To heck with it! I'm out of here. I don't need this anymore." I mean, this is, of course, the concept of Atlas Shrugged. Where the productive sector says we're going on strike. We don't need this. And of course, the state is saying, "No, you can't do this. You have to keep working to fund the welfare state," and all this nonsense. You can't close down your business. You can't move overseas. You have a moral duty to fund the welfare, to keep working to fund the welfare warfare state. Well, in any event, you start cratering. Your private sector starts cratering, and as you tax it more, you start running marginal firms out of business because they're just on the margin. They're barely making it. Tax them a little bit more. Those are more people now going to the dole sector, the parasitic sector, and you've got this caving in effect where the private sector says, finally, I can't handle it anymore, and starts to cave in on itself. And that's what happened with Greece. Now, what would the statist press over here say about Greece? Well, what are they saying? They're saying the Greek government should raise taxes, okay? Even though, the private sector is like busted. And they're saying that the European Union should print up the money because you see that the country Greece can't print up euros. But they're saying, the statist press over here is saying, well, have the European Union print up the money. Just start printing euros, stimulate the economy. Well, the reason the statists say this is they want happy days to be here again. They don't want to do anything to alter the welfare warfare state. They just want everybody working over here, or the private sector working. That's why they want to put people back to work. How do we get people back to work? Because they want taxpayers that fund the welfare warfare state without having to reduce the size of the welfare warfare state. And so, all this nonsense is stimulate, bailout, and all they're trying to do is have happy days again for the welfare status and the warfare status, where, that you got all the people working hard over here to fund the people over here that are on the dole, both in the military and the welfare sector. And that's what they're striving for. Now, the question is whether that will happen. I mean, we've been saying for years, decades, that this is not a good system. That it's inevitably going to fail. It's going to collapse in on itself. And of course, that's when you get the economic crises. And with the economic crises, they come the same crisis environment where the government starts clamping down on the citizenry. Now, here's a good example. Okay, 9/11. What did they do with the terrorist attack on 9/11? Well, they seized emergency powers, just like dictators throughout history had done. They said, "Oh, well, now we're at war. You know, we're at war, and this is a criminal offense, terrorism, but we're going to treat it as an act of war also at our option." So they got some terrorists going into federal court, some terrorists going to Guantanamo, some terrorists going to Afghanistan, and of course nobody's been convicted yet. You know, they just say, "Well, take our word for it." You know, and so they assume emergency powers, the same emergency powers that were assumed by Mubarak, the military dictatorship in Egypt, you know, after the assassination of Anwar Sadat. Those have lasted 30 years, and they still won't surrender these powers. Those are the powers that the U.S. military now has. And this is no big surprise. If we go over to Chile, 1973, the U.S. military was there saying, we got a communist in our midst. This is Allende. There's going to be a threat to our national security and all this national security nonsense and stuff about the communists are coming to get us and so forth. Same thing as they do now with the terrorists. So the U.S. government said, okay, what can we do to get Allende out and a military dictatorship in? Well, they precipitated an economic crisis. Now, the reason this is interesting is that it shows how government officials can seize on economic crises just like they can on terrorist crises. And, you know, things were in chaos. You know, people were going on strike. There were demonstrations in the streets. And a lot of this was precipitated by the Nixon administration on purpose. So then they participate in the military coup there and support Pinochet, this military dictator, as he starts rounding up people using the military. Indefinite detention, torture, execution without trial, indefinite detention. In fact, the CIA even helped to kill a couple of Americans there, you know, that were called communists, even though they were really just liberals. And that was another irony of this thing, is that the Roosevelt administration had adopted the socialist principles of, you know, Social Security, welfare, Medicare, and so forth, that were being adopted by the Allende regime later in '73. He was copying the U.S. Or Cuba, which of course uses public schooling and Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security as the real undergirding of their socialist welfare state. But the point is that the military in Egypt and in Chile was doing the same sorts of things, assuming the same powers that the U.S. government assumed after 9/11. Over there, it was an economic emergency. Over here, it was a terrorist emergency. And so if things get bad over here, and it's very possible that we may be seeing all the chickens coming home to roost now, that they may not be able to stimulate their way out of this. And when they stimulate with fake and false printed money, all they're doing is blowing up a new bubble. I mean, they're just kicking the can downward. But it's ultimately going to come, the bill's going to come due. But they may not be able to pull this off. And if you see, let's say, a massive cratering in the value of the dollar, gold soaring, and don't forget, you know, they confiscated gold under the Roosevelt administration so that Americans couldn't see what they were doing, because gold is a signal that the government's doing bad things. And so they confiscated gold. They made it a felony offense to own it. And we may get back to those days. I mean, it's important to be prepared. But it's also important to fight to restore the principles of liberty, both with respect to economic liberty and civil liberties. And that, of course, means, it doesn't mean reforming the system as the statists are doing, you know, Obama and Romney and the rest of their ilk. It means challenging their system, questioning their system, and replacing it with a system that Adam Smith talked about in terms of economics. A free market system, an unhampered market economy where the government's not managing the economy, where the president's not getting jobs for people, where it's none of their business, where the economy manages itself through the people just making economic decisions, and where you've got a free market money, as Friedrich Hayek called for in his essay, The Denationalization of Money. Probably people would turn to gold and silver coins, but at least the government would no longer have the power to loot and debase the currency, plunder the people. And then, of course, you return to a constitutional republic to replace the national security state that should have gone out of existence a long time ago, at the very least, when the communist threat, the Soviet Union dismantled. Get rid of all those military bases overseas, bring all the troops home, discharge them into the private sector, and restore a constitutionally limited republic with no big standing military force. I mean, our ancestors warned us about this. And so what we really need to do, in essence, is return to founding principles. What are the founding principles of this nation? An unhampered market economy, a free market, a private property order, as compared to a welfare state, a managed economy, a regulated economy, the drug war, the DEA, the SEC, the on and on and on, the whole alphabet stuff that came into existence under Roosevelt, including Social Security, Medicare, ditch them all, where people keep everything they earn, no more licensure laws, open up business, there's free enterprise that's free of government, and then, of course, a limited government constitutional republic where Americans are free to travel and trade and interact with the people of the world. No more sanctions, embargoes, assassinations, torture, indefinite detention, none of these dictatorial things for America. That's the future of this country. That's the show. Thanks so much for tuning in, and see you next week. Good night.